It is important to view knowledge as sort of a semantic tree. Make sure you understand the fundamental principles, the trunk and big branches, before you get into the leaves/details, or there is nothing for them to hang on to. My proceeds from the PayPal acquisition were $180 million. I put $100 million in SpaceX, $70 million in Tesla, and $10 million in SolarCity. I had to borrow money for rent. I think it's very important to have a feedback loop, where you're constantly thinking about what you've done and how you could be doing it better. I think it's important to reason from first principles rather than by analogy. The normal way we conduct our lives is we reason by analogy. With analogy, we are doing this because it's like something else that was done, or it is like what other people are doing. With first principles, you boil things down to the most fundamental truths, and then reason up from there. The idea of lying on a beach is my main thing just sounds like the worst. It sounds horrible to me. I would go bonkers. I would have to be on serious drugs. I'd be super duper bored. I like high intensity. I came to the conclusion that we should aspire to increase the scope and scale of human consciousness in order to better understand what questions to ask. Really, the only thing THT makes sense is to strive for greater collective enlightenment. In terms of the internet, it's like humanity acquiring a collective nervous system. Whereas previously we were more like a collection of cells that communicated by diffusion. With the advent of the internet, it was suddenly like we got a nervous system. It's a hugely impactful thing. I take the position that I'm always to some degree wrong, and the aspiration is to be less wrong. One of the really tough things is figuring out what questions to ask. Once you figure out the question, then the answer is relatively easy. When I was a little kid, I was really scared of the dark. But then I came to understand, dark just means the absence of photons in the visible wavelength 400 to 700 nanometers. Then I thought, well, it's really silly to be afraid of a lack of photons. Then I wasn't afraid of the dark anymore after that. One of the biggest mistakes we made was trying to automate things that are super easy for a person to do, but super hard for a robot to do. I could go and buy one of the islands in the Bahamas and turn it into my personal fiefdom, but I am much more interested in trying to build and create a new company. You need to live in a dome initially, but over time you could terraform Mars to look like Earth and eventually walk around outside without anything on. So it's a fixer-upper of a planet. Every person in your company is a vector. Your progress is determined by the sum of all vectors. I read a lot of books and talked to lots of people. I didn't have any one person who was a mentor, but I always looked for feedback from the people around me and feedback from the historical context, which is books, basically. I don't read many general business books. I like to read biographies or autobiographies. I think those are pretty helpful, and a lot are not really business. In order to make the right decisions, you have to understand something. If you don't understand something at a detailed level, you cannot make a decision.